Oh. A very warm welcome, everyone. We're due to commence shortly, not quite yet. To be more precise, this is not an inherently vague problem, unlike many others in philosophy, but we will start shortly, and I hope that's sufficiently descriptive as a description. With that said, before we commence, can I invite all the speakers to this wonderful conference to join me for a photo at the front with the book as well. So, you know, that's the main protagonist. Sorry, Alex is the main protagonist, but the book is an extension of the main protagonist. So let's have a group photo first for everyone who's speaking. If you could join me at the front, that'd be grand. Thank you. All of us, everyone. So Professor Bai, Professor Toward, yes, Professor Lee, wonderful. I think we're not missing anyone, right? No, we're not. Wonderful. Wunderbar. German. Great. Let's have this book. Okay. We'll now take a group photo from the back, so you just all look at the camera in front. So we have a camera here, and we'll just pretend our seats there. Yes, let's all pretend our seats. Sorry. Yeah, pomp and circumstance is always so unfortunate and so undesirable and yet necessary. All right. Yes, wonderful. Great. Great. Fantastic. Yay. We'll start 5 minutes late, so push back by 5. Great. Let's go. All right. Perfect. So I will begin by introducing you. Wonderful. So could I have everyone's attention in the room, please? Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this, one of the inaugural events of the Hong Kong Ethics Lab, which is a research cluster nested within the University of Hong Kong Department of Philosophy. We are most honored, to welcome a speaker who needs really no introduction, but I will just do the ceremonial bit of introducing him in any case. Professor Alexandre Lefebvre, got that right, is a professor of politics and philosophy at the University of Sydney. He is also known as one of the most popular, accessible, and engaging scholars in rendering philosophy and also political theory more accessible and also transparent and ultimately relevant to the general public at large. His book, Liberalism as a Way of Life, provides us all with a humorous, profound, reflective, and also incisive set of insights into the practicing and adoption of liberalism as a way of life, for the words of Pierre Hadot and beyond, which I'm sure Alex would be able to share his insights on shortly. The purpose of this event, and also many future events to come, is that we hope that the Department of Philosophy here at HKU could serve as an integral hub and also nexus under the leadership of course, our great department chair who can't be here with us today, but she sends her regards in spirit, Dr. Rachel Sturken, and also many of our leading faculty and researchers, and not just in the department, but also in the Faculty of Law, and also the Faculty of, or the Department of Chinese, joining us today to discuss and also comment on this book by Alex. And of course, beyond just HKU, we are very privileged to have leading scholars from the mainland, from Australia, and beyond joining us in the audience as well as on the panels for today. So in terms of housekeeping, just 2 quick rules from me. Firstly, please ensure that you've switched off your mobile phones or you've switched it to silent mode, because we don't want any unwelcome interruptions. All welcome interruptions are also not welcome, so that's trivial, actually. Yeah. No, it's a null subset otherwise. Okay. And secondly, if you would like to ask a question, please do, because this is ultimately what philosophy in general is about. It's about asking questions, interrogating assumptions, even ones that don't seem problematic. So the more questions we ask, the better. And I, as your host / moderator / MC, would try my best to facilitate these questions whilst also ensuring that we stick to the schedule. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our wonderful protagonist for today, Professor Alexandre Lefebvre. The floor is yours for the next 20 to 30 minutes, after which we'll entertain a couple of questions from the floor before proceeding on to the first panel of today. Thank you very much. Please. Welcome. Yeah, just here's the mic for you. Yeah. Do you have a lapel? Don't take them, unfortunately, so it's very handheld. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, perfect. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the very warm welcome. I want to start, if I may, with some thank yous. So as I say in the acknowledgements, is it okay if I sit? Can you see me? Yeah, okay. As I say in the acknowledgements to my book, one of the core meanings of the word liberal is to be generous. So however much it's going to make some people here squirm, I'd like to thank the following liberals. First, Brian Wong for his energy and kindness and for assembling this extraordinary and not a little intimidating, thank you, group of scholars to respond. I'm deeply honored, a little freaked out, but deeply honored is the main message. Thank you too for Daniel Bell for being so kind and supportive of the book and the project, and for providing the initial impetus for my trip here. Really like to thank the HKU for bringing me out in style, and the Ethics Lab and the Philosophy Department who've been so very generous. To my distinguished panelists, thank you so much. Some of you I've just met, some of you are new, becoming old friends, so this is all very terrific, and I just couldn't hope to be supported by a better group of scholars. So thank you, and thank you, of course, to the audience for being here. So what I want to do with my opening bit is I want to run through the arguments of the book in kind of an accessible way. The commentators can kind of clock out for the next 30 minutes because they've read the book, but I hope to just provide some context for those who haven't in order to be able to participate and more fully join in. And I'm happy to be interrupted for any kind of clarificatory questions at all. So this is a launch symposium. I don't know what kind of mashup it is, but it's a happy event to announce my book in Hong Kong, Liberalism as a Way of Life, which was published a few months ago by Princeton University Press. Now, it has some origins in my own research, of course, but I want to start out with a more specific event that got my thinking going about this particular topic. Just confirm, can you hear me okay in the back? My voice is good? Yeah, okay, perfect. So you might, I don't know if you have an ear for accents, but if you do, you'll hear that I am not Australian, despite the fact that I work in Sydney, so I'm Canadian. And I moved to Sydney in 2010 with my wife and then very, very small child. And for the first few years, every time Christmas rolled around, we would go back to Canada. I'm from Vancouver, and we'd go back to Canada, and we'd have a lovely time with family, but it was always expensive, always drizzly, always kind of crappy weather. And in 2016, we're like, okay, we're staying put this year, and we're going to enjoy some fun, because it's going to be full summer in Sydney. It's going to be Christmas on the beach. This is going to be awesome. So we opened the gifts on Christmas Day, and then we strolled down to my local beach, which is about 10 minutes away from where I live, and we were greeted, my big reveal is spoiled. I can go up and do it. Yep. Okay. I can just go up and do that. But is this? Yeah, it's working. Oh, it is. When you click, it works. Can you go? No, back. Sorry, everyone. It's supposed to be very swish. All right. So here is what greeted me on Christmas Day. It was a party like I had never seen before. There were thousands upon thousands of partier. It was all bikinis, beer, and tattooed flesh as far as the eye could see. And I had two thoughts that ran through my mind when I saw this. The first was that Sydney is the most godless city I've ever lived in. Like, this is Christmas Day. Like, what the hell? The second thought was that this is how people from the Middle Ages must have imagined the fun parts of hell. So you have Hieronymus Bosch, 1510. This is basically like the vibe. And it got me, though, to start thinking, like, who are we? Like, what kind of people are we that we do this on Christmas? And by godless, I live in a godless city, I mean that, I don't mean that we're wicked or depraved, but that very importantly, I think I live, or at least my part of it, and a lot of parts in the West, we live in a God absent, I want to say, kind of place. A place where God and religion is no longer the central reference point or anchor of morality, and that something else has taken its place. And as you can tell, it's announced right in the title, my bet is that liberalism is functioning something like the core of people's worldview now, and not just their moral ideals, but also their aesthetic sensibility, what we laugh at, what we find outrageous. Basically, the whole vibe of people is explainable in some deep way by their relationship and their absorption of liberalism. So that's the gambit I want to put forward. I should say that this is not the usual audience I pitched the book to, of course, because this is, it's not a liberal democratic country, it's a liberal city. Anyways, but I'm principally talking about Western liberal democracies who have this kind of background culture of liberal ideals. I'll come back more to that. Does that make sense as a first move? Okay. If you have any questions, just stop. So I make three big claims in the book. The first, so one is descriptive, one is normative, and one is prescriptive. So the descriptive claim is this one, which is that a great many people living in Western democratic countries today are liberals, what I say, all the way down. By which I mean that they draw their values and vibe and their sense of what is good, right, normal, outrageous, wrong, funny, worthwhile, and much more from liberalism. And really, I'm not messing around. So here's the last line of the book. Liberalism is the source of my soul. Yeah, that's right. The wager of this book is the same is probably true of you. That's the claim I want to make, that a lot of us in the West, especially secular people, which in the West is kind of 30%, in the United States, 40% in Australia, and New Zealand it's like 60%, Nordic countries, ditto. So this is the kind of center of our morality. That's the first claim, the descriptive one. The second claim is a normative claim, and I'm sure I'm going to be grilled in the most pleasant way possible by many interlocutors today, which is that liberalism is a good way of life, one that is intrinsically rewarding, generous, and fun. To be super clear, I don't think it's the best way of life. I don't think such a claim could be made, that there's a single best way of life. But I do believe it has its own excellences, its own worthiness, and can stand tall with Christianity, with Confucianism, with whatever else you want to throw at it. It's going to be different, but I think it's going to be as fun and as worthy as fun as any of those. I should say joy, not fun. Fun sounds too trite, but I hope you get the idea. And the last one, I'm not going to talk about much in my introductory remarks, but since it's a core part of the book, I outline practical exercises, which I call spiritual exercises, to help readers deepen and enrich a liberal way of life. It's a little bit, I'm kind of tongue-in-cheek here, but I call it a self-help book. It is kind of a self-help book. It's ways to help liberal become the best liberal selves they can, and to try to see what might be the advantage of living that way. So, three claims: descriptive, normative, prescriptive. I know it's not a class, but question, you good? Okay, right. Moving on then. So here's a quick roadmap. I'm not going to be able to do all of this in the time. And Brian, when I hit kind of 5 minutes left, just wave for yeah, that's okay, perfect. So I want to say a word about the history of liberalism as it's pertinent to the concept of it. Then I want to give a brief definition of liberalism, which is going to come right back when we talk with Herman. Then I want to give a bit more sense of how we are liberal, how some people are liberals all the way down or deep down. I want to try to fill that in. My book draws on a lot of pop culture in order to try to exemplify the ways in which liberalism has trickled down into our world. And so I'll give a few examples of that. Next, I want to get somber for a second and say how most liberals are actually just joke, hypocritical, fair weather liberals, pretend liberals. And then last, I want to conclude on a high note to suggest what might be good with a liberal way of life. So that's the game plan. So starting with the history of liberalism. I realize this is a philosophically minded audience, but there is a book that informed my thoughts so much about the history of liberalism, and it's this. It was published in 2018, also by Princeton, by Helena Rosenblatt, a friend of mine, and it's called The Lost History of Liberalism, From Ancient Rome to the 21st Century. So liberalism is a really interesting ideology because it's at once very old and it's at once very new. So it's very new in the sense that people only started calling themselves liberal in a political sense in the 19th century. It started first as a response rebellion against Napoleon, And then Napoleon, big jerk that he was, claimed the name liberal for himself and spread it throughout Europe. What are you going to do? So it's a very new ideology by the standards of intellectual history, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's also a very old word, and it has its roots in Latin and in Roman morality and Roman politics. And the root of the word, you'll hear it, of course, is liber and liberalis, which is to say being someone who is free and generous. And so what Rosenblatt does in this book that I admire so much is she traces out this ideal of being a free and generous person as it keeps getting reinvented through all of these different forms of, let's say, Western civilization. Come back to that later. So she traces out the idea first in ancient society, in Rome in particular, where being liberal meant being generous to society, being ready to give one's talent, one's money, at limit one's life to something bigger and better than yourself. Next, as you might imagine, it gets reinvented under Christianity, where the values shift completely. And in Christianity, in the King James Bible, it's used, the word is used about a dozen times, always in connection with giving to the poor. So the idea of liberality gets reinvented with our, with generosity towards those who need it. And last, in the early modern moment, especially in the American Republic, it gets reinvented along kind of Roman lines to mean generous to the public good. So that's what I really want to capture in this word liberal, that it combines these two senses which are absolutely crucial for the ethic I want to develop. On the one hand, it means free. We all know that. We know liberalism is about autonomy, it's about freedom. Okay, fine. But it's also about being generous. And I really want to insist upon that. And also in the English language, we preserve that meaning, right? So if I ask for a liberal serving of soup, I'm not asking for a politically progressive soup, right? I'm asking for an abundant, big bowl of soup. So we have that idea of liberal as being kind of muchness, abundance, and we preserve that. So that's what Rosenblatt does. Okay, so what happens with it? That's all the prehistory. Now what happens in the 19th century is so fascinating. So there's all of these so the early founders of liberalism are household names in political philosophy. They include J.S. Mill, Alexis de Tocqueville, Germain de Stael, George Eliot, and many more. And they all have their own different versions of what they're doing. But I believe, and other historians I believe argue that the great question that animates 19th century liberalism is the following. Like all of them were kind of freaked out about the same sort of stuff, and they asked that question, which is to say, how can modern subjects, and like us, we remain in this same kind of field of modernity, remain free and generous, which is to say remain liberal in the face of powerful new social forces. What social forces are we talking about? Two in particular. One is capitalism and its tendency not just to render us impoverished and inequality, but also to turn us into kind of grubby little consumerist materialists who just want a scotch at the end of the night and that's the good life. Like that is like an image of like mediocrity that they were afraid about that capitalism would inspire. The other big thing that liberals were freaked out about, and this is the more important one, is democracy. They looked at the French Revolution and they went, oh shit, we need protections against this. We need protections against popular power, but we also need protections against kind of like popular taste also, about this kind of mediocritization that comes about with the massified society. And so liberals then invented all of these institutions that would protect individuals as being free and generous. So if you just close your eyes for a second and think of the main institutions associated with liberalism, individual rights, division of powers, judicial neutrality, all of those things, and you can name a bunch of others, all of those institutions are avowedly and explicitly counter-majoritarian. And here's the take-home point. Liberalism was born in a deep suspicion of democracy. And so today, while in the West we have liberal democracy, it's important to recognize that that took 200 years of compromise and achievement to make, a reconciliation between those two terms that are pulling in opposite directions. And I'm sure today we'll talk about later how those two terms may be coming apart more and more today. At least that's how I read things. Questions on that? Okay, I know not a class, but sometimes one question goes a long way. Yeah.
What do you say about negative conceptions of liberalism?
I'm coming. Okay, actually, you just introduced my next slide, so thank you. Yeah, right, perfect. So the question then, okay, I'm going to come to that, but I'm going to come through my route here, which is that, so in the 19th century, liberalism was something both political and ethical. It was a doctrine about how to live well in the face of all this nonsense that bombards us, democracy, capitalism. Now, the question then becomes very interesting. What the hell happened to liberalism? When did liberalism retrench itself into this rather more narrow, legal, political doctrine, maybe that's concerned only with negative freedom and those kinds of things, and that makes no real ethical claims on us? And different historians and thinkers point at different moments at which liberalism became retrenched itself, became a bit more thinner, became more anemic, I want to say. Rosenblatt points to the early 20th century when you had all of these kind of free market types who were looking around at the progressivism, say, of the New Deal, and they freaked out and they wanted to create a discourse of classical liberalism that would be based on individual freedoms and market freedoms as well. So there you have Hayek, Friedman, von Mises, and that's the first move where liberalism walks its ambitions back. A next one that's important is Samuel Moyn's book, came out last year, called Liberalism Against Itself, and he focuses on the Cold War, and he looks at all the Cold War liberals, like Isaiah Berlin, like Judith Shklar, like Trilling, Himmelfarb, there's a bunch. And he says that what they were all worried about was effectively collectivism. Totalitarianism is too strong, collectivism. And what they wanted really was they looked at the great progressive and ethical perfectionist ambitions of, say, the USSR, and they said, no, 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 no. We need a doctrine that protects us from that. So Cold War liberalism was another step towards moving liberalism towards a very much more political, narrow doctrine that preserves core individual freedoms, but doesn't try to do much more. And we'll talk, I'm sure someone's commentators can talk about this, I talk about political liberalism and the development, which is kind of the most modern version of it, which is when liberalism goes towards a doctrine about pluralism. And so John Rawls's later career is all about how to create political frameworks that would accommodate different conceptions of the good life in one harmonious polity. That's basically the problem. When things get tricky in political theory, I like to draw them. So here's my drawing of political liberalism according to Rawls. So you have something like liberal political conception, just call that the liberal framework, constitutions. And then you have a bunch of different kinds of people. It's like a walks into a bar joke, but you have a Christian, a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Kantian, a utilitarian, and they all have to get along. And so what liberals then try to do is devise the right kinds of structures by which all those different kinds of people not just won't tear each other apart, but can affirm that same core set of values for the right reasons. And so that's where, again, liberalism loses its ethical ambition because it doesn't want to propose any thick conceptions of the good life. It wants to remain inclusivist. All right, so that's my first bit. How am I doing for time? No, I need more than that. Oh, wow, okay, right. Well, all right. Let me then move to my definition of liberalism. This is where I'm going to get grilled in approximately 26 minutes on this topic. So get 5, and this is, sorry, I don't mean to anticipate, but get 5 liberals in a room and you're going to get 10 definitions of liberalism, right? We are a coreless bunch. And so you just have all these different strands of liberalism. You have kind of social democracy, you have more libertarian kinds of things. Anyways, it's just kind of a mess of a concept, which we'll get into. Oh yeah, sorry. No. I have to go back one second. Okay. sorry. Wipe your memory, which I'm glad I have the 25. I'm just talking off my slides here. So there's an important point I want to make, which is that the defenders, here's the point, reset. The defenders of liberalism tend to see liberalism as a political kind of thing, a legal kind of thing, and it tends to be just that. Now, interestingly for me, there's a group of people in the Western world who see liberalism in almost the same way that I do. They see it as a very thick ethical doctrine that has gone everywhere in our culture, and it can impose or at least suggest a particular kind of worldview. And I'm talking about conservative critics of liberalism. So this is a very popular, this was a book that made a big splash, 2018, by Patrick Deneen. See someone that's known here? Anyone heard of Patrick Deneen? Yeah, okay, so Patrick Deneen, political theorist at Notre Dame, and he wrote this book with kind of the big, bold title. Obama retweeted him, and this title is like, better pay attention. And then the book took off, and this is Deneen's essential claim that, I'll just read the quote here, liberalism is not merely, as is often portrayed, a narrowly political project of constitutional government and juridical defense of rights. Rather, it seeks to transform all of human life and the world. So that's the conservative criticism, but also insight. That liberalism is like basically the blob. You know that horror movie? It's like this thing that just absorbs everything. It gets bigger and bigger and draws its energy kind of vampirically from everything that it encounters. So that's one critic. Another, Adrian Vermeule, jurist at Harvard University, same kind of take. He writes, the main fact about our lived political order in 2024 is that the public sphere is dominated by a very particular, comprehensive, or perfectionist version of liberalism, which is aggressively sacramental and liturgical. He's going to review my book, so that's going to be fun. Yeah, so that's where Vermeule lands, and the idea, again, is that this is not a narrowly political thing, and that political liberals are either culpably naive or diabolically clever by claiming that it's just this framework for different conceptions of the good to hang out. That's just nonsense to them. And interestingly, I don't agree with their condemnation of liberalism. Obviously, I couldn't have written this book, but I do agree with their assessment of its scope. I think they are onto something correct about that. To use the recurrent metaphor of the book, which is why it has the cover it does, liberalism has become the water we swim in, and that's what I think they perceive. They hate the water, they choke on the water is the foulest, blackest, but I think that they're right in its identification of water. Close parenthesis. Okay, now I want to go to this business about defining liberalism. So as I said, it's a mess. Now, different kinds of scholars, they kind of break along disciplinary lines, tend to propose different ways of trying to define liberalism. Herman's going to talk about this, so I'll just be very brief. Basically, the philosophers, being a kind of like get to the point kind of bunch, philosophers look at this mess and they're like, okay, we just need a simple definition. And what philosophers tend to do is stipulate one particular definition for liberalism to be like the true core of it, and then they might spin out some history to justify it. So liberalism is about individual freedom, boom. It's about autonomy, boom. It's about protection from fear and predations of the state, that boom. Anyways, you just pick something about liberalism and claim it as a core definition. Now, the upside to that is that it's clear and it gives you a purpose. The downside is that it's totally partial and won't speak to other people with different definitions of liberalism. The other way is the historical way, which is contextualist, which is basically to try to look at how different people and actors, thinkers, politicians use the term liberal and liberalism, and to try to look at liberalism as the richly contradictory sum of its parts, and historians do that. Now, the advantage of that is that it's truer, it's more kind of accurate in some sense, but it's difficult then to know what on earth liberalism is because there's just this massive evidence. So what to do? How to define liberalism, and here is my attempt at it. And to do so, I draw on John Rawls, a thinker I'm sure you've all heard of, if not read ad nauseum, but just bear a little bit more, and it'll come into focus. So John Rawls is arguably, not controversially, the most important political philosopher of the 20th century, and his books are tremendously complicated. They're these crazy architectures of concepts, but at the end of the day, Rawls thinks that liberalism actually has a pretty clear and obvious definition. He says, So I'll just give you the definition and I'll work back from there. What Rawls says is that society, a liberal society, sees itself as a fair system of cooperation from one generation to the next. That is the definition that Rawls advances as to what liberalism might mean. Now, it's very important for me as to how he arrives at this definition, which is that Rawls doesn't stipulate it. He doesn't say that I, John Rawls, mighty moral philosopher, think this. He doesn't derive it from first moral principles either. What Rawls does instead is he looks around his society. He looks around at all the major political artifacts of his society, whether that's constitutions, political speeches, judicial decisions, et cetera, et cetera. And so his first move, as I wrote here, is that Rawls looks at the major public institutions of liberal democracy to see what core moral propositions they enshrine. And what he finds, should have reversed the slide order, but is he finds that all of them basically affirm this idea, that society is a fair system of cooperation from one generation to the next. And then his whole moral and political philosophy is basically spent inventing concepts, principles, ideas, arguments by which this can be specified and made absolutely consistent, both to what it demands about our countries and what it demands about ourselves. So my definition then of liberalism, I'm just amplifying it a little bit to give it more scope. But I want to say it's the social, political, moral, and psychological doctrine that grows out of a conception of society as a fair system of cooperation, specifies what it means, and tries to make it real. The key move that Rawls and I are both trying to make is that we're stipulating a clear definition, fairness, but we are being contextualist. We're trying to anchor it in our own understanding according to our major public institutions of what liberalism amounts to. So the idea is that the definition will already have a grip on our heart because we all know it. In the West, I feel no one reads Rawls for the first time. He's just thematizing everything that we already at least pretend to know about our society. And that's the claim I make. Questions? Now, very important distinction between what Rawls is doing and what I'm doing. And in part, it's because I'm writing 40 years, whatever, 50 years now, later than Theory of Justice. So it's this idea of where do we find and identify liberal values. As I said, where Rawls finds and identifies liberal values is in the public political culture of liberal democracy. So he looks at it in political stuff, let's say, the Constitution, political speeches, judicial decisions, all that stuff. Cool, I don't disagree with that. But I think that it's gotten much broader, much more ubiquitous than that, liberalism that is. And so here is my location of liberalism. So liberalism, Lefebvre, me, and conservative critics, my weird bedfellows all of a sudden, locate liberal values and sensibilities in the background culture of liberal democracy. Places like TV, movies, social media, music, parenting, pornography, dating, friendship, the workplace, and much, much, much more. And so here, let me move to the next bit of my talk, which is I want to try to give you an example of what on earth I'm talking about. I'm talking about like liberalism's everywhere. Like, Alex, what are you actually pointing to? So let me give you an example. It's kind of a fun example. And it's through a book that was published 10 years ago that I absolutely love. It's a book with a great title. The title is Holy Shit, The History of Swearing by Melissa Moore, published by OUP, I want to say 10-ish years ago. Now, the title is so great, not because it's like, ooh, swearing. The title is so great because in 2 words, what she's trying to do is encapsulate the history of swearing in the West. So at different moments in time, a different kind of swear word becomes the truly bad or taboo word of a society. And by tracing out the history of swear words, you can very quickly reverse engineer what a society takes to be moral, valuable, sacrosanct, all of that stuff. It's basically what the taboo violates. So on the one hand, you have your holy words, right? So these are cultures in which the unsayable words are basically terms of sacrament. So this would be Judaism, this would be the Christian Middle Ages, but here these are literal swear words, oaths that bind yourself to God, Christ, damn it, Lord, all of those things. Those are very dangerous words to handle back in that time because they literally call upon God to witness something, and badly or falsely done can endanger you, your family, your community, etc. So those are the really risky words back in the day. At different times, though, it's a different kind of preoccupation that's really important. So you got your shit words, your bodily words, your obscenity words. And so, of course, there's like Victorian culture, which is all about like the body and its fluids and all of that stuff, which is like, ew. Anyone know, fun pop quiz, what was the major swear word in Roman civilization? If you want to get into a fight with a Roman, like pronto, what would you go rock up and say? Yeah, something it's not ball exclusive, but yeah, okay. It's terms of sexual passivity. It's terms that would indict someone as being the receiving member of male-on-male sex. So it would thereby present you as not the active, male, hairy-chested Roman citizen that everyone aspired to, but someone who was a sissy, someone who was, receiving sex. So that was that. Now, where do we find ourselves today? So in the West, we like to pretend, and I'd like to hear, I want to hear what are the Chinese swear words. I don't want you just to say them. Maybe later we could talk about that. In the West, we kind of pretend we're so cool now and we can say any word and we're post swear words. That's nonsense because there's a new category of word in the West that if I were to say here at home, I would be reported and fired within a week. And those words, of course, are slurs. Slurs have become the new swear words in the West. And slurs, don't say them, but you all kind of know them, which is the N word would be at the very top, but also slurs around sexual orientation, around gender. Even relatively tame swear words in my youth are now absolutely not okay. Like in my youth, you could say about someone if they were kind of freaking out, you would call them a spaz, which is like a spastic. And now that is not okay to say anymore. And so that just shows how words migrate into this taboo category. So why are slurs the big bad word of Western societies today? because they attack the core commitment of liberal morality, which is that everyone in our society should have a chance to flourish and should be able to cultivate a healthy, robust sense of their own self-esteem. A missile is just like a laser aimed at that and tries to teach people to hate themselves from the inside. So when I say that we are liberal all the way down, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, where liberal morality has entered into our bloodstream in ways that we just don't even think about, which is how you know it's really effective. In the words that, not that I just wouldn't publicly use a slur, I wouldn't privately use a slur, it wouldn't cross my mind. It would just be like, so not me. So that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to talk about, and that's just one example, and I try to give a whole bunch in the book to try to bring this out. So some are about what makes us laugh today. So some stand-up comics that are famous in the West. I talk about the kinds of things that liberals and seculars in general find important and provide purpose in life. So I look at a TV show. I look at pornography, which I'm worried is the bit of my book that's going to memorialize me. You're remembered for these stupid 8 pages or whatever it is on pornography. If you want the short version today, if you go to pornhub.com, don't do it right now, and you search by most popular videos, all of the top videos are about playing with the idea of consent. They're all about like an initially unwilling sexual partner is brought around to want to have sex. And why is that so like taboo and kind of like provocative? Because it's playing with the one liberal ethic around sexuality, which is that any sex is good sex as long as it's consented to. So naturally, porn being porn, it tries to identify those spots in our culture that are particularly sensitive. So that's how porn has gone, thanks to liberalism. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying, look, liberalism's here too. So that is what I'm trying to do over and over again. Do I have like 10 minutes? Or where's my...
Exactly 9 minutes left.
Great. So I hope that's clear. That's what I'm trying to say is that in my culture, perhaps in yours, you can see if this resonates with you, we are raised in this sensibility. It has become mother's milk to us in so many different ways. Now, I bet some of you, I expect some of you, have an objection brewing in your head, which is that you say, okay, Alex, you think that liberalism's hegemonic, and you also think liberalism is based on fairness. And the objection is Alex, have you looked at the world today? Like, have you actually gone outside and looked at any city in the world today? Which is that we live in societies that are manifestly unfair, that deny fairness at every opportunity, that are mired in systemic inequalities and abuses and violences, and that are manifestly illiberal. So it seems that I'm claiming liberalism is this hegemonic thing, when in fact it's at its shakiest and at its frailest, and as far as it could be from realizing its own values. And my answer to that is, yeah, kind of. I more agree with that than not. And here I turn to a thinker that's very important for my book, which is Kierkegaard. So Kierkegaard, bear with me a sec, this is going to look left field and make sense in like 3 minutes. Kierkegaard is a Danish theologian, 19th century, and he's also one of the great critics of the 19th century. And Kierkegaard lived his whole life in cosmopolitan, nice Copenhagen, fine coffee, good patisserie, it was great. And Kierkegaard would walk around his society, and he would see that it's kind of like explicitly Christian everywhere. Like there's a Lutheran church on every corner. Everyone is professing the good life of Christ. They're going to church, cool, cool, cool. But then he really looks at these same people, and he's like, what do you guys believe in? And he really looks at them, and they're not Christian. They're at best bourgeois Philistines. Like what they really want at the end of the day is a roast on Saturday and a mistress on Sunday. They want social respectability, quiet pleasures, and just to get on with the easy kind of flow of life. And he looks at them and says, you guys are hypocritical jokes. You do not live according to the morality that you profess. And this is a very important style of criticism. So Kierkegaard's not the only social critic. There's other great social critics of the 19th century, of course. So you have Nietzsche, who's also indicting the same culture-ish. But he's looking back to some other version of culture that was superior. He's looking back to, let's say, the Greeks. You take Marx, same culture being criticized, but he's looking forward to something else, to communism, the birth of a new man, a new woman that would redeem everything. Okay, Kierkegaard's main move is to say, we don't have to look elsewhere for the right values. We have them. All we have to do is take them seriously. In other words, it's a rigorously internalist critique of the hypocrisy of his time without trying to go somewhere else. So, what's the conclusion I'm drawing from this? I don't think we live in Christendom in the West anymore. Christianity's declined public morality. But I do think we live in this. And this is my word. Every time you say it, I get 10 cents. Liberaldom, which is exactly the same, which is that people who are liberals all the way down profess the liberal pieties. That's their moral compass. But in so many ways, live illiberally. They seek out tax breaks. In my case, my great confession is that I send my daughter to a private school, which I know cannot be squared with my commitments to fairness, but I'm not willing to do otherwise, given that it's my daughter. So what I'm trying to urge my readers to do is look inward and say, hey, yeah, you profess all these liberal niceties and pieties, but how liberal are you really? And so it's that inward critical move that I'm trying to do a la Kierkegaard. Last bit of the talk is what then? So we're hypocritical, we're kind of wishy-washy, fair weather, Sunday morning liberals. What now? So I'm trying to urge my readers to commit to their own liberal values. And I have to give them, I have to try to furnish an answer as to why they might want to commit to their own liberal values, because there's so many goods that come from defecting from your liberalism. It is nice to have more money. Like, it's bullshit to pretend otherwise. More money is nice. I'm not going to claim otherwise. It's nice to send your kid to a private school and be able to lavish upon her certain kinds of advantages that will make sure she has a good leg up in life. Those are goods. So what I have to do then is try to present my reader with another set of goods, real lived goods, that could come from adhering to your liberal values. And so what I do, and Simon's going to talk about this, I think, is I try to suggest in the book, I have a very clickbait chapter called 17 Reasons to be Liberal. It has to be said, I had to find an odd number and a prime number, because that's the clickbait number. So it is maybe 16, it's maybe 12, I don't know, but it's a lot, and it's 17, and I landed on 17. It's not a hill I'm going to die on, but that's what I said. And so in the spirit of overwhelming you all at once, 17 reasons to be liberal that I believe follow from living a life that is an honest attempt to live up to the values of fairness and of reciprocity at the heart of this moral and political doctrine. Shaboom! I'll just read them out loud, and you can laugh at them, scrutinize them, whatever you want, but I'm happy to defend them, or try to at any rate. So impartiality, autonomy, anti-snobbery, playfulness, stalwartness, a feeling of being home in society, gratitude, self-coherence, avoidance of hypocrisy, humility, unity of the self, gracefulness, delight in others, tolerance, civility, cheer, redemption. That, I think, is a liberal package. And importantly, I have to qualify this. No single one of these goods, I think, is distinctively liberal. I think you can get a lot of these out of a Confucian way of life, or out of a Christian way of life, or whatever. But put together in this constellation of 17, go 19, go 15, doesn't matter to me. But this kind of package, I think that is a distinctively liberal arrangement that comes from that way of life. Is that clear? Right. So very last question here, and I'm going to wrap up with this, is what I'm doing at in the end in the book, I'm trying to, well, I just need two of those. What I'm trying to do in the book is reactivate or revive maybe the oldest question in all of political philosophy, which is the question that Plato addresses in the Republic. So in Plato's Republic, it's a text that you've read, book 1, they all sit down for a cozy dinner, and they start talking, and Socrates is trying to persuade them as to what justice is, trying to convince them what justice is. And then you have this brutish, beastly man, this guy, Thrasymachus, who's just like the badass of the Greeks. And he busts in, he's like, Socrates, this is nonsense. The best life of all is not one lived according to justice, it's one lived according to injustice, to tyranny, and the tyrant is the happiest of all. Look at all the money, look at all the power, at all the women that guy has. That is awesome. And so what Socrates and Plato have to do then is try to talk up the goods of being justice, the real no-nonsense benefits that come from being a just person. Not just the benefits from living in a just society, those are manifest. Living in a just society is obviously good. You have reliable people, you have fairness, and that's awesome. But why not free ride? Why not just kind of quietly chisel on the side? And that's what Plato is trying to figure out. Why is it desirable for the individual, him or herself, distinct from the extrinsic benefits of living in a liberal, in a just society, why should you and I uphold the principles of justice? And I'm doing exactly the same question. I'm just updating it, I believe. Why is it good for a liberal, in the way that I'm describing a liberal, to really commit to a liberal way of life? And my answer is, I hope, direct, which is that if you are a liberal and if you do not commit, and if you remain merely a pretend liberal, then the 17 goods of a liberal way of life will elude you. And that is sad. I'll stop there.